So much plastic. What am I gonna build with all this? I like things big here on Zorpazorp, stupidly epic, some might say. And today, Games Workshop have thrown down the gauntlet and begged me to build a wargaming board bigger than I've ever built before. And they have buried me in plastic crack to make it happen. Last year, I began work on crafting the biggest wargaming board in YouTube history. A mega build to beat even my biggest Middle-earth mega boards, the Imperial Palace on Terra, at the height of the Horus Heresy. And last week, we began on a whole new phase of the build in epic scale to line up with Games Workshop's relaunch of their tiny scale wargame, Legions Imperialis, epic scale battles in the Horus Heresy. To kick on this mighty build of epic proportions, Games Workshop have sent me a mountain of epic scale plastic scenery. But before we go crazy planning our Imperial Palace, we need to find out what we've been sent. It's time to sort some plastic crack. So first up, we've got just a heap of armies. There's obviously the core box buried under here, but just a heap of different kind of detachments, tanks, infantry, just a whole bunch of forces to fight over the Imperial Palace. That's cool, like crates and silos, spiry roofs. There's a lot of plastic here. Now where things get interesting, of course, is all of the scenery, and I'm seeing a lot of different types here. Modular buildings, spires, different roofing options, industrial pieces as well. Let's have a big look through all of this and find out just what we've got to work with. I dug through the mountain and sorted all the sprues into piles based on the types of building they contained. 20 sprues of the new ruins, which have just come out, and these are like blasted up, damaged versions of kind of everything else, I think. We've got 16 sprues of the Manufactorum stuff, 20 of the spires and roof details, and then 100 sprues of the kind of standard epic scale Imperial buildings. This is the perfect starting point to build a massive Imperial city, but at 156 sprues, I'm not going to clip this all out by myself. We're going to need some help. So I jumped in the car and cruised up to Christchurch to my mate Jimmy's place and slapped down all of the sprues onto his lovely gaming table and a bunch of plastic storage tubs and got clipping. 156 sprues of scenery, and we've got 1 day to clip them all out. Let's see if Jimmy and I can do it. We decided to start with the easiest frame to unclip, a huge stack of 25 half frames of standard Imperial buildings, and we quickly worked out that with a nice pair of sharp snippers, we could get these off the sprue and basically prevent any need to clean them up, saving us valuable time. So that's 25 of the small sprues finished and done pretty quickly, and they're kind of a lot easier than I expected because it's all lots of small square shapes rather than big kind of complex Gondorian fantasy arches I'm used to. Starting off well, but I still have 131 of the full-size sprues, so a lot left to go.
Making a mess shooting his cutaways.
Shouldn't be in there.
Next, we jumped onto the main building frame, which we've got double the quantity of, and they're double the size, and with the pieces on these way smaller and more detailed, we soon realized we'd gotten way too optimistic aiming to get this all done with just the two of us. We gave up about halfway through this pile, and then switched over to the spires sprue, so that I'd have a little bit of everything clipped out to make a start on the build, and ended up clipping out and sorting about a third of the total mountain of sprues. But we didn't even touch the ruins. We haven't touched any of the Manufactorum. There's heaps of the main city buildings and heaps of the spires left. But enough to get started, but so many sprues to go. Good effort, Jimmy.
Can I eat now?
Back home in the studio, it was time to get to work, and this is my least favorite part of the whole build. Right now, I'm super overwhelmed by the scope of the project, and it's really hard to get going, so I decided to just start looking at each scenery kit in isolation, and then make some fancy hybrids later on when I know the materials better. Armed with my awesome odorless plastic glue from Deluxe Materials, which you can grab from Gap Games, linked down in the description, I set about messing with the most basic of the kits, the standard intact Civitas Imperialis buildings. These have a range of parts which can be broken down into two styles. Some thicker set walls which have some large solid structural forms, and then a second set of thinner walls with windows which have two different heights. The window tiles can then also be layered together really nicely for some extra height options, and all of the pieces do have some good modularity, enabling you to make a whole bunch of different layout options. You can see here how the three different wall types can stack together in this simple 2x2 box building, and with the fundamentals understood, I started getting a little more creative, exploring how the pillar joining system enabled me to make longer walls and different shaped buildings. In my second building, I looked at reducing the cross-section in terraces to make a tiered structure, which I think will be nice for epic scale gameplay, and it also looks a lot more visually interesting than just boxy skyscrapers, especially across an entire vista of a massive Imperial Palace layout. I then pushed this even further with my third building to explore using the different wall heights to amplify the tiered look. Then I grabbed one of my 1-foot city tiles that we carved up in last week's video and began to explore the layout of my first city district, and soon realized I'd need a few more structures to get the right level of density, so I knocked out a few more buildings, looking for even more interesting footprints to give the sector some real visual variety. Remember, we're looking for a nice density here for all of the tanks and the troops to have some really interesting combat, whilst all of the massive titans can use the width of the roads and streets that we'll be making later on. I glued down all of the buildings using my tried and trusted combination of high bond PVA and foam safe superglue from Deluxe Materials. This gives me a really long-term bond, but also a super fast grab to the foam, so the pieces don't get knocked flying as I'm faffing about. So there is our first city block, and I kinda hate it, and I don't really know why. It just feels really bland. There are some interesting shapes there, and the plastic kits look nice in isolation, but it's just not coming together on the piece. I put that to the side for now and started delving into our second kit, the Civitas Imperialis Spires. Now these things are a mighty pain. They were awful to clip off, so many tiny parts, but they come together reasonably easily, and there's a fair bit of modularity. I started off knocking out two of the foundation variants, which are like these plinths that are built with a floor tile, and then I had a look at some of the various kind of column or tower pieces. Some of these are hexagon based, some of them octagons, and they kind of mesh together in different ways, and then there's like a whole lot of various roof options. Small domes, big pointy spires, and there's quite a bit of scope for variation here. I made a bunch of the various components, and then started experimenting, combining them in different ways, mounting towers to plinths, using different roofs, and I started to get a grip to how these could be pretty useful, but I think that they actually look the best when you use them as accents to the normal Civitas Imperialis buildings, coming together as a hybrid build. So I grabbed my second city tile and then threw down a bunch of the Civitas buildings, nothing too massive, mostly like small plinths and then one larger building, and began to play with that layout, combining the two kits together, and this definitely worked much better than plonking down these kits by themselves, and I like this sector more than the first one. The added detail through the varied forms feels a bit more realistic, but there's still something missing. Now, when making such massive scenery projects like the Imperial Palace, magnetizing certain components can be an absolute lifesaver. All the various walls and towers on the palace gatehouse and rampart, and even these individual city sector tiles are prime candidates for magnetizing. I've been magnetizing different parts of a whole range of projects for years, from all the various weapon and equipment loadouts in our Dawn of War Warhammer series, all my Horus Heresy vehicles from tanks to titans, even destructible ruins on my Osgiliath megaboard. But for such a massive project as the Imperial Palace, we will need a lot of magnets.
So we got some help from today's sponsor, the almighty Magnet Baron, because magnets, they just solve everything.
If you need magnets for your wargaming, then look no further than the magnetbaron.com, your DIY super magnet home. Magnetbaron.com have a huge range of wargaming magnets which are super powerful and even have specific kits for notoriously difficult to magnetize models, magnetize movement trays, and magnetize collapsible flight stands for the epic travel wargaming experience.
I challenge you to find a better feeling in all of wargaming than the pure bliss of this moment. Magnetic perfection.
So to score some boss wargaming magnets for all your army needs, hit up the magnetbaron.com, link down in the description, so go and show him some love. Again, I plowed ahead in spite of my misgivings, and I began to work on the brand new kit that has released alongside Legion's Imperialis, and my goodness, this bad boy was a refreshing change. There is something special about making ruins. It's like my happy place as a scenery crafter, and the new kit, which has been cleverly designed to essentially be like a ruined version of the old Civitas buildings, is really quite nice. It's not as intense as some of the brand new stunning Ray Dranfield Middle-earth plastic kits from Games Workshop, but of course this is a much smaller scale, so I'd say that it's pretty spot on for what you need to be able to do at this scale. After clipping the main parts off from 4 frames, I slapped together my first building. Just a rectangle, but big enough to explore all the varied kind of ruined tiles, and there is a lot of variety there. There's subtle changes in height and different blown up parts and clever tweaks to make the ruin look genuinely blasted apart and not just a heap of repeating forms over and over again. And then of course we have some broken floor tiles and interior level shenanigans to play with, which just makes building everything so much more fun than just solid intact structures. There are some challenges of course. This is all very tiny stuff, so it can be a little bit more finicky than the intact building kits, but once you work out the method of what to glue in what order, you can get quite a roll on when you're assembling. I knocked out a second building with a much bigger footprint, pushing the pieces sort of even further, and then my third building was smaller to see what kind of shapes I could create to make a really interesting layout for the city tile. I then slapped down my foam foundation and just like the first two, started layering out all my little creations, and once I was happy, I glued them down into place, and then we get a bunch of fun tricking out the landscape with rubble. The new kit contains like a whole bunch of greeblies and bits of detail of blown up this and smashed up that. There's a collapsed stairwell, which is probably my favorite, and there's even some exploded shipping containers that I'll have a big play with later on. It's amazing how much life that these little pieces add to the whole tile overall. Then it was time to grab all 3 of my tiles so far and take stock of what we've achieved.
So I sort of hate these. There's something about them that's just not working. I really like the kits. I think the plastic kits are really awesome, particularly the new ruins, but something about the way I'm just slapping them down on this sheet of foam. Look, basically what it boils down to is this is a completely different scale, and I'm just not used to building scenery at this scale, and there's something that I need to work out. Now I've got a few ideas, so let's go and do some experimenting on our 4th city sector and see if we can solve this problem.
If you're going to grab the new epic scale Legion's Imperialis box set, which is out right now, or any of the scenery, or just any hobby supplies at all, make sure you use my affiliate links down in the description. You'll score the best prices no matter where you live around the world, and it sends me a kickback, which is so damn important to the channel, so you can just feel awesome about heaping more plastic onto your pile of shame. And I mean, hey, look, you're only going to be adding like small scale things to the pile. I mean, even if there is a whole lot of them. In short, use the affiliates. I love you. Cheers, guys. Our first step is to see if I can push the kits any further by making some serious hybrid ruins. So I started by knocking up a new set of intact buildings, again just trying to get as creative as possible with different combinations of components and layouts. Then I grabbed another couple of sprues of ruins and snipped out a bunch of pieces and then got to work building some blown out and damaged upper floors on top of my intact buildings. Straight away, these structures have so much more presence, especially the buildings that combine all of the different tile designs. Having heaps of broken upper floors that are kind of smashing down and collapsing onto more intact floors looks really great, and it should create some nice gameplay. I whacked those structures down onto my city tile and had a little play, but there is still something missing. So my next idea is to try to blend the plastic buildings and the foundation to make them feel a little bit more like they really belong in their environment. I do this all the time with my large format plastic kits like my massive Osgiliath or Minas Tirith builds, where I will build a foam plinth underneath each structure, but of course that may work really nicely at 28mm scale, but this is almost a quarter of the scale of normal Warhammer, so instead of using a big thick piece of foam, I decided to use just a layer of cardboard and see if that was thick enough. Now the issue here with the cardboard is it basically has very little interesting texture and you can't really carve into it, so it's important that we create detail through the form. So I glued my buildings down onto the cardboard and then cut really carefully around the footprint to hopefully create a nice detailed gutter around each building. Now this isn't not working, but it doesn't look perfect. I might try like a thicker bit of cardboard in the future, but for now, we're gonna try a new method, which I'm hoping is gonna be a pretty big winner. And for this step, we're going to need some foam. Now I think the big issue here is that the board just feels like this huge flat sheet of foam with plastic buildings glued onto it. So if I make a few raised sections for various buildings, like foam plinths that have some little ramps, then we can not only create more varied gameplay experience, but we improve the visuals because that foundation layer isn't one flat landscape, it's kind of undulating and it's going up and down just as the plastic buildings are going up and down. The plinths are super simple, they're just blocks of foam, ramps cut in, and then the sides are patterned with a large set brick and then textured with scrunched up aluminium foil. Then I jumped back into the main studio to return to our massive gatehouse and rampart that we started last week and began to experiment combining with plastic kits into the main foam carved build. First up, I want to build a really impressive battlement for one of our towers. So I made a lower level of windowless walls which have a really nice sloped base that complements the shape of the tower battlement nicely. I started lining this up with the foam plinth that forms that tower battlement and realized I needed to change the back wall to the windowed wall variant just to make the piece fit better, and it kind of looks nice as well. And I then added a bunch of detail trim in foam to support the little buttress pillars that the windowed wall panels have, and that kind of really helped to integrate the plastic and foam layers together. Then I grabbed a bunch more windowed pieces and knocked up a second level, reducing the size to kind of keep terracing as we move up the tower, which creates some nice spots for the defending troops to deploy. Then I grabbed the Manufactorum sprue and had a look at all the cool industrial details for the very first time, and some of the silos that you can build really reminded me of the shape of the shield generator from the Hoth Echo base in Empire, and as these ramparts would be part of the Aegis generation network, I glued one half of the silo together and then built another small intact building and a big sexy spire and threw that all down on top of the battlement, and then whacked down the city sector tiles that we've made so far, even balancing one of them up above the walls to give us an idea of where we're going with the combination of city sector and palace walls. And I don't hate it. There is still something eluding me here with this build. The epic scale is proving to be really tricky, but I'm confident that if I keep layering more and more details and building what we've got here, we can make a really nice Imperial Palace.